The environment is humanity's greatest resource. The human race makes use of the natural world in many ways. The way we affect it most is through our pollution, which is byproducts of transportation, energy and food production, manufacturing, and resource extraction. Currently, the world is attempting to find a way to help slow the effects of this pollution on our climate through many different methods. In this presentation, we will look at the European Union's current efforts to curb climate change and to help create a more sustainable environment for future generations. The European Union's current strategy involves 5 major efforts to reduce pollution. A landmark emissions trading scheme covering 45% of the greenhouse gas emissions within the Union. A renewable energy target aiming to raise the levels of sustainable renewable power across the Union. Efficiency targets for industries not covered by the emissions trading scheme. Financing for innovation in the field of climate mitigation to promote the development of new ways to tackle the issue of climate change. These methods are spread across the EU in the form of legislated targets for all nations to meet, and have seen resounding success in the years since their employment, with greenhouse gas emissions 22% lower than 1990 levels, with a target to reach 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. Across the EU, different countries are using different methods to reach these EU legislated goals. A recent roundtable discussion on the policies of different countries allows a look into the specifics of the different directions that countries are moving in and how on track they are to reach either the EU's goals or more ambitious goals of their own. In this presentation, we will observe the presentations made by Germany, France, Sweden, and finally Romania, 4 countries in different stages of their climate mitigation efforts.
As a member of the EU, Germany follows several of the outlined projects to improve climate change over the next few decades, with a significant emphasis on improving the conditions for the future. The policies focus on a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, improvements in renewable energy, and energy efficiency. As of 2007, Germany aimed to make a reduction in greenhouse gases since 1990, outlining a 40% decrease by 2030 and to eventually become a greenhouse gas neutral state by 2050. Greenhouse gas emissions stood at 1,251 million tonnes in 1990, dropping to 906 million tonnes in 2015. While this is still a huge amount of CO2 emissions, it does show a total reduction of 27.9%. If Germany continues to take action to reduce the use of coal and other GHG contributors, the goal of a 55% reduction by 2030 will be achieved, then leading on to an 80 to 95% reduction by 2050. Renewable energy is a big contributor in the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. The biggest source of renewable energy in Germany is wind power, making up 15.9% of their total energy source. Germany aims to have a reduction of 35% by 2020. According to statistics outlining electricity generation, renewable energy's gross power consumptions as of 2015 sit at 31.6%, which shows a 4.13% increase since the previous year, with the end target being an increase of 80% by 2050. In terms of Germany's energy efficiency, the aim is to have a 50% reduction in energy consumption by 2050. Since 2008, there has been a steady increase in energy production of 1.3% per year, bringing their energy efficiency percentage in 2015 to a 10.7% improvement. With these actions, Germany currently sits at number 2 on a European Union-wide leaderboard ranking countries on their compliance with the regulations outlined in the Paris Agreement. At number 2, Germany still only has a score of 54 out of a possible 100. There is still a long way to go for Germany to reduce its contributions to climate change, but with the policies laid out and if they continue to aim for their initial targets, there will be a considerable improvement.
By the late 1990s, 2 sources accounted for around 90% of French electricity generation: nuclear 75 to 78% and hydro 12 to 15%, both of which are largely carbon-free at the point of generation. France was therefore one of the first to push a tax on carbon within the EU, urging other members to play a positive role on this issue of climate change. The National Low Carbon Strategy (SNBC) bill was adopted during its first reading at the National Assembly in October 2014. It directs and guides our policy of reducing greenhouse gas emissions in an economically suitable manner for the medium to long-term future. By 2030, we aim to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40% compared with 1990 levels, to reduce fossil fuel consumption by 30% by 2030 compared with 2012, to increase the share of renewable energies to 32% of final energy consumption and 40% of electricity production by 2030, and to reduce final energy consumption by 50% by 2050, with an intermediate 2030 target of 20% compared with 2012. The SNBC and its carbon budgets are legally binding on all public sector decision makers at national, regional and intermunicipal institutions. Citizens are bound indirectly through policies formed by the SNBC and will be educated on the topic of climate change and associated policy interaction with economy. Our national target for renewable energy is to increase the share of renewable energies to 32% of final energy consumption and 40% of electricity production by 2030. The Environment Minister, Ségolène Royal, has been quoted as stating the number of wind farms in France will double while solar energy obtainment would triple by 2023. A goal has also been written into the Energy Transition Law to decrease the share of nuclear energy in electricity production from 75% to 25% by 2025. On the topic of innovation and funding, on Transport Action Day, Ségolène Royal, the Minister of Ecology, Sustainable Development and Energy, launched 3 key initiatives to accelerate climate change action within the transport field. The first was a call for developing an electric car which would be accessible to all and thus not priced over €7,000. The second is supporting the Zero Emission Vehicles Alliance Paris Declaration on electromobility and climate change bid to encompass regions and states which commit to electric mobility in order to achieve 20% electric vehicle use by 2030. Thirdly, a national plan to deploy positive energy roads incorporating photovoltaic cells to generate electricity. The aim is for 1,000 kilometres to be built in the next 5 years. France has a number of energy-efficient policies in place. Within the transport sector, we have a commitment to promote low-energy methods of transportation, including using rail freight for the transport of goods through building infrastructure of efficient rolling motorways, high-speed rail to and from the airport, and improved access to the largest ports. In regards to used transport means, the bonus-malus system for cars was established in 2007 based on CO2 emissions per kilometre, rewarding the purchase of lesser-emitting vehicles and penalising the purchase of the biggest emitters. L'écotaxe kilométrique, an eco-tax per kilometre, is also enforced on most lorries as per Article 1 of the Law Grenelle 1. Within the housing sector, new building standards for denser, energy-positive housing have been put in place. Possible implementation of intelligent housing, allowing for smart adaptation to weather conditions and changes, has also been considered. Within the industrial sector, investments made following energy audits should decrease energy consumption 20% by 2030. The previously stated initiatives are similarly in place over all sectors throughout France. France also encourages other EU members to adopt progressive climate change policies.
In Sweden, we have reacted to the EU emission trading system by enacting the Emission Trading Act and the Emissions Trading Ordinance. This provides companies the opportunity to apply for an allocated emissions allowance. Special allocation principles are applied when considering each applicant's case. Companies within the trading scheme must have a permit to emit carbon dioxide. Sweden will reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by 2020 and no fossil fuel emissions by vehicles by 2030. Additionally, we are increasing renewable energies to 49% by 2020. This is implemented to maintain the goal of no net greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. It has been projected that greenhouse gas emissions will need to decrease by 19 million tonnes in 2020 to reach the 40% reduction of emissions. Another initiative we announced earlier this year is the proposal of a new law to ensure all future governments make credible effort to achieve a zero greenhouse gas emission, as well as reporting on how they meet that goal. Statistics indicate that the average Swede releases 4.25 tonnes of carbon dioxide per year into the atmosphere, compared with the EU average of 6.91 tonnes and the US average of 16.15 tonnes. Sweden aims to be 100% reliant on renewable energies by 2050. We have quite a mix of different green sources in Sweden. One such source is bioenergy, which represents 22% of all Sweden's energy supply. Wind power is also utilised, with 7% of electricity generated through this method. Solar energy is used and is growing at a rapid rate. Wave power is an energy source that is currently undergoing pilot studies and further development as it is an underdeveloped technology. To become 100% reliant on renewable energies by 2050, we need to be innovative and increase the speed we transition to a more sustainable society. We want to be world leaders and become one of the world's first fossil-free welfare countries. A couple of examples of how this will be achieved is to increase the funding in solar and expand the total number of solar cell plants. This will involve government funding of 39 million Swedish krona per year to total 1.4 billion Swedish krona by 2019. Additionally, we'll be investing in electricity storage. This will involve funding of 25 million Swedish krona starting in 2016. And for the remaining period between 2017 and 2019, a total of 50 million Swedish krona per year. These are just two of the total innovations and investments we are doing. We first tackled energy efficiency in 2005 by developing a 5-year program that would grant companies tax relief if they created energy plans and took the steps to implement them. This program alone showed energy savings of 1.45 terawatt hours per year, valued at 53.9 million euros. In 2008, we passed a new law on requiring, when properties are sold, a statement to be provided on how much energy a building consumes. This allows transparency on buildings' efficiency, as well as promoting better energy use. As a public service, we have created an energy advisor position in each of our 290 towns to advise people on energy efficiency, such as using low-energy lights and switching to different heating systems. Whilst we have low carbon emissions, even though we consume more energy per capita, the reason for our low emission rate is due to our energy mix, where 83% of electricity is sourced from nuclear and hydroelectric power.
Romania became a member of the European Union along with Bulgaria in 2007 and makes up 3.9% of today's EU population. It has maintained a very impressive sustainable energy program despite only having a GDP of 178 billion US dollars. The West Balkan area has an outstanding potential for producing renewable energy, Romania being the highest in the region, ranking at number 13 on the All Renewables Index. The major principles promoted by Romania's Ministry of Environment and Climate Change include precaution principle, when participating in activities that may impact the environmental quality, the principle of pollution and ecological risk prevention, the principle of preserving biodiversity, the principle that environmental resources are bound by payments so that the consumption of Romania's natural resources is not free, and the principle of sustaining environmental remedial activities. Romania has been able to effortlessly comply with the European Union's 2020 objective and has estimated to further reduce their greenhouse gas output by 24% as a minimum by 2020. The Ministry of Environment and Climate Change has estimated that Romania may even be able to increase this to as much as a 35% reduction. The energy efficiency aspect has been achieved through the creation of energy consumption reduction targets, as well as the enforcement of natural resource consumption targets in an attempt to preserve Romania's natural resources. To increase the renewable energy efficiency rate, the Ministry has donated the entire EU Climate Change Fund to wind energy alone. Financing the programs can be divided up into private and public funding. The majority of projects, roughly 58%, have been funded by private investors hoping to get returns from Romania's heightened ability to naturally produce electricity. The rest has been funded by either the European Union or the Romanian government itself. The most prominent constraint in Romania's renewable energy development program is money. It has become commonplace that major projects overrun costs and fail to deliver construction agreements, causing Romania to lag behind other European countries. The most rational rational reason for this is the lack of industrial experience of this level as a country. There is also an issue in Romania with being able to implement new and innovative renewable energy production techniques. This mainly has to do with private investors only wanting to invest their money in techniques that have already been proven effective, such as solar and wind. Private investors want to increase Romania's solar energy industry threefold, in fact. Romania is therefore on track and compliant to agreements made within the European government.
As you can see, policies may change when crossing a border in the EU, but the motivation to take action on climate change remains. Through the EU's directive and each nation's motivated and efficient action to carry out this directive, the EU is the world leader in climate change mitigation. With ambitious future targets, the EU will only become a safer and greener place for future generations.